Hello and welcome to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly, your weekly dose of the top pro-life news and issues, all from a Catholic perspective. I'm your guest host, Debbie Cowden, filling in for Catherine Hadro while she's away. Thank you for joining us. In this week's show, Representative Ron Estes joins us to discuss his legislation that would place a federal ban on abortion after a Down syndrome diagnosis. A group of 11,000 scientists call for population control to combat climate change. We speak out. And this.
We brought her home, and we lived boldly from that point on.
We introduce you to a Virginia family who says their daughter's short life with a mystery illness left a lasting legacy of love. But first, our top story. A federal judge last week struck down a new Trump administration rule that would protect healthcare workers who refuse to participate in abortion procedures on moral or religious grounds. In his ruling, U.S. District Judge Paul A. Engelmayer said the U.S. Health and Human Services Department overstepped its authority in issuing the rule. He also denied the department's claim that there was an increase in complaints about workers forced to participate in procedures that violate their conscience, such as abortion or physician-assisted suicide. The Department of Health and Human Services declined to comment on pending litigation. HHS issued the rule earlier this year to broaden conscience protections for healthcare workers. Joining us from Washington is Melanie Israel, a research associate in the DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society at the Heritage Foundation. Melanie, thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me.
Can you explain to us how this HHS rule would protect conscience rights of healthcare workers?
Sure. What we have to be very clear on is that for more than 40 years, federal law has protected conscience rights in the context of healthcare. And so what these rules were geared toward was providing the administration with additional enforcement and oversight tools, mechanisms that would allow them to ensure that these critical civil rights laws are being enforced, that entities know what their requirements are, that people know what their rights are. And so it's certainly a setback that this rule has been blocked. However, I don't want people to be under the impression that conscience rights in general have been thrown out the window. That's not the case.
How would it complement the existing federal protections for healthcare workers?
Sure. So if we look back to previous administrations, unfortunately, conscience rights have not been treated with, frankly, the respect that they deserve over the years. The Obama administration in particular was notorious for moving quickly, if at all, on complaints that came in through their Office of Civil Rights. And frankly, that's unacceptable. We're talking about fundamental civil rights for people to be able to live and work in accordance with their conscience in the public square. Again, this is a fundamental right and it needs to be treated as such. And so the Trump administration, in contrast, has been vigorously enforcing this law. Most recently, they did a notice of violation to a hospital system in Vermont to get them to take some corrective action regarding conscience violations. So even without these rules in place, they have been open for business. They've been taking action, and it's unfortunate that they're not going to have these additional oversight and enforcement mechanisms at their disposal, but we'll see what happens with the appeals process. But in the meantime, they are most definitely open for business.
Well, and this judge argued that there hasn't actually been an uptick in these cases. Is that true?
According to the administration, they have received over 300 complaints of conscience violations. And of course, they have to investigate these complaints. A complaint in and of itself doesn't necessarily mean that there's been a violation. However, we're talking about fundamental civil rights. And so if there is discrimination going on, then they absolutely have to take this very seriously and investigate, do their due diligence with the fact finding, and get to the bottom of things. And again, as we've seen already during this administration, they have been issuing notices of violation and working to get various entities into compliance. So again, they're very much open for business.
So then what are the next steps for this rule now that it's been blocked?
Sure. Well, it's relatively new, a relatively new development, and so at this point, we'll just have to wait and see what the administration is going to do with the appeals process. From what I understand, it takes time for them to to go through that decision-making process on their end. But again, the mainstream media has completely bungled their reporting about this rule. I've been seeing completely erroneous headlines suggesting that it was the rule itself that gave people these fundamental conscience rights, and that because the rule has been blocked, people are going to be forced into participating in things like abortion or sterilization. And again, that's simply not true. Federal law for over 4 decades has protected healthcare workers from having to participate in procedures like that, and that hasn't changed.
So then if there is a healthcare worker watching right now who has been pressured into assisting in a procedure that violated their moral or religious beliefs, what would you advise them to do?
HHS has set up an entire section on their website where people can go to find out what the laws are, to find out what the process looks like for them to file a complaint. Again, you typically have to file a complaint and let them do their investigation to find out if a violation did occur. And they'll be able to advise people on what their rights are, what your recourse is, and if there has been a violation of federal law, then they'll be able to step in and help an entity come into compliance with federal civil rights law.
Melanie Israel, Research Associate in the DeVos Center for Religion and Civil Society at the Heritage Foundation. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
Joining us in studio is Prudence Robertson, a Communications Associate for the Susan B. Anthony List. Prudence, thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Can you walk us through why the HHS issued this rule?
Sure. So the Obama administration was notorious for failing to protect conscience rights, and because of that, there were a lot of cases that went unchecked during his presidency. In May, the Trump administration issued new rules that would protect the conscience rights of Americans. Not only does it show victims what they can do when their rights are violated, but it also lays out the penalties that HHS can issue to medical centers who violate these laws.
And can you share with us any cases that you know of where a healthcare worker's conscience has been violated and where they've been compelled to participate in a procedure that went against their moral or religious beliefs?
Yes, absolutely. There's no doubt that this has unfortunately happened before. The first case that comes to mind is Kathy DiCarlo. She is a nurse in New York, and she was tricked into assisting in an abortion. She was told that the baby had been miscarried, and in reality, the child was 22 weeks old and was alive, and she was forced to either assist in an abortion or lose her job. A similar case in Vermont just happened this past August, where a nurse working at the University of Vermont Medical Center was forced to participate in abortion or lose her livelihood. And it's just really tragic that these nurses who care about the sacred dignity of human life were forced to end human life.
It's
sad.
awful.
Yeah.
And what can lawmakers do then to protect the conscience rights of these healthcare workers?
It's absolutely crucial that these medical centers be held accountable when they discriminate against their pro-life employees, their own employees. And we're very thankful to President Trump and Secretary Azar at HHS for continuing to work to protect these conscience rights, but there's more that lawmakers can do. And one very important step that Congress should take would be to enact a private right of action for citizens so that they can seek relief and justice in the court system, no matter who is in charge in the executive branch and who holds power.
So what's next then, and what can pro-lifers do to help?
I think Senator Ben Sasse said it very well. He hit the nail on the head when he said that in this country, the government is not allowed to tell us that our faith is okay at church on Sunday, but not on Monday in the workplace. It's just simply something that we can't stand for as Americans, and that law should hold true for anyone who morally objects to abortion, especially medical professionals, doctors and nurses who don't believe that abortion is okay. In America, we have been founded on a foundation that respects the individual freedoms and the deeply held beliefs of the American people, and protecting the conscience of the people is an American value that simply, it can't be denied. And that's why it's so important to protect the consciences of these medical professionals. And as the pro-life movement, it's our job to urge Congress to make sure they're protected under the law and that these rules are enforced.
Amen. Prudence Robertson, Communications Associate for the Susan B. Anthony List. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me.
The Save Moms and Babies Act would prevent the FDA from approving new chemical abortion drugs, put an end to labeling changes for existing drugs, and stop abortionists from dispensing these drugs remotely. If made into law, this bill would stop the expansion of chemical abortions, which are on the rise today. This Save Moms and Babies Act is a common sense bill that would protect both women and unborn children. And that brings us to this week's call to action. Tell your representative to co-sponsor the Save Moms and Babies Act. Here's how you can get your message straight to your lawmaker. Go to ProLifeWeekly.com. Once you get to this website, you'll be able to type in your basic information so we can tailor this message for your specific lawmaker and send it straight to them. Again, the Save Moms and Babies Act would stop the expansion of chemical abortions. We recently saw that the overall abortion rate is going down, but chemical abortions or abortion pills are on the rise. Not only are these abortions fatal for the unborn baby, they're also dangerous for mothers as well. That's why pro-lifers should want to see this common sense Save Moms and Babies Act put into law. Tell your U.S. representative to become a co-sponsor of this law by going to ProLifeWeekly.com. Turning now to our next story, Representative Ron Estes recently introduced legislation that would place a federal ban on abortion after a Down syndrome diagnosis. The Down Syndrome Discrimination by Abortion Prohibition Act would make it illegal for a doctor to knowingly perform an abortion on an unborn child diagnosed with Down syndrome. The legislation would also prohibit anyone from forcing a woman to have an abortion because her baby has Down syndrome. The legislation specifies that mothers who undergo an abortion would not be prosecuted, but doctors found to be in violation face a fine and imprisonment of up to 5 years. The bill has 32 original co-sponsors in the House, and Senator James Inhofe introduced a companion bill in the Senate. Joining us now from Capitol Hill is Representative Ron Estes of Kansas. Congressman, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thank you for having me.
Can you tell us about the Down Syndrome Discrimination by Abortion Prohibition Act and why you decided to introduce it?
Yeah, it's a bill that we introduced on October 30th with 32 co-sponsors, and now we're up to 42 co-sponsors in the House. It's a companion bill with the Senate bill that Senator Inhofe has introduced that has 14 co-sponsors there. You know, what we're really trying to address is that 2 out of 3 unborn babies are aborted if it's found that they have Down syndrome. And that's in the United States. It's even worse in some of the European countries. And so we think that all of these individuals need to have the right to have a life and have the opportunity to live the life that they can and choose to.
And many pro-abortion activists accuse pro-lifers of trying to criminalize women, but can you tell us what the real repercussions of violating this law would be?
No, really what it is it's a penalty for the doctor that performs the abortion. It doesn't charge the mother at all in any case. The penalty, whether it's a fine or imprisonment, is for the doctor who performs the abortion. Also, it sets penalty provisions for somebody who tries to force the mother to have the abortion as well.
Well, and if this bill becomes law, then how would it be enforced?
Well, it'll be a federal law. You know, right now there are only 8 states that have laws that protect abortion and protect Down syndrome's babies. And so we need to make sure that we have that federal statute that works across all states in the country and that we can have federal enforcement as well.
Well, and we've seen some of those state bans on abortion after the Down syndrome diagnosis being blocked by judges. So do you think this one will hold up in court if it's signed into law?
Well, I think so. I mean, we've had a long history of, going back to Roe v. Wade, that there can be restrictions that are rational, that provide opportunities to address where the problem lies, which is with the doctors that are performing the abortions, and still protects the rights of the mother as well.
So can you speak to how this bill would protect a vulnerable population?
So really, when you think about people that have Down syndrome, I mean, they deserve to have the right to life just like the rest of Americans do. And so what this does gives them the opportunity to be born, to be able to live their life, live their career, have families, do what they choose to do without punishing the mother, but it makes sure that the abortion is not performed by a doctor or that the mother's not forced to have that abortion.
Amen. And pro-life lawmakers are currently in a minority in the House. So what is your message to House Speaker Nancy Pelosi about this bill?
So I think the big thing about it is that, you know, we have a long history in our country where we've supported people's right to life, and that's the important part. It's you know, one of the founding bedrocks of our country. And we want to make sure that we continue that process, that we don't discriminate against people who happen to have Down syndrome. We don't want to determine who deserves to live or who dies based on the quality of the life that we think they might have. So we want to make sure that everybody has that opportunity.
Representative Ron Estes from the state of Kansas, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Well, thank you.
When we come back.
So we brought her home and we began 3 months, the most beautiful, intense 3 months of our life with her.
We bring you the story of a Virginia family who says their daughter's short life with a mystery illness left a lasting legacy of love. Stay tuned as EWTN Pro-Life Weekly continues after this break. Welcome back to EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. I'm Debbie Cowden, filling in for Catherine Hadro. More than 11,000 scientists signed a petition calling for population control as a means of combating climate change. That's this week's Speak Out segment. In an article published Tuesday in the journal Bioscience, the scientists wrote that planet Earth is, quote, facing a climate emergency. They argued that population control was a necessary response to this emergency, writing, quote, the world population must be stabilized and ideally gradually reduced. This ideology is dangerous because it suggests that reducing the human population is the best solution to our problems. But the petition presents no facts or data to support its claim that the human population is the cause of shrinking ice caps, rising ocean levels, and an increase in the average global surface temperature. And it doesn't show any data to prove that reducing human population could help the planet. That's just bad science. And who gets to decide which populations are controlled? The UN, individual countries, global intellectual elites? For years, there's been a push to shove birth control and abortion down the throats of women in developing countries who don't want either, by the way. We don't get to pick who is desirable or useful enough to reproduce and who should be restricted in the name of the global common good. That's called eugenics, and it can lead down a slippery slope to things like ethnic cleansing and genocide. Our Catholic faith considers care for the environment to be an issue of prudential judgment. We should make decisions and support policy based on 4 general principles of Catholic social teaching: dignity of the human person, common good, subsidiarity, and solidarity. There can be different proposals to address the problems related to the environment, but those never should come at the expense of human life and human dignity. Population control comes at the expense of human dignity, and we as Catholics should always oppose it. And remember, there is something you can do to counter today's culture of death. Follow this week's call to action. Go to prolifeweekly.com to email your U.S. representative and tell them to co-sponsor the Save Moms and Babies Act. This week, Catherine Hadro brings you the story of a Virginia family who says their daughter's short life with a mystery diagnosis left a lasting legacy of love. Here's this week's Pro-Life Focus.
Are you laughing? What's so funny?
When she passed away at the age of 22, she was 5'8", beautiful young woman, but she was the developmental age of a 7-month-old child.
The day Courtney Elizabeth Lindbergh began her life in the Catholic Church in 1992, she also began a life with a mystery diagnosis.
Everything was fine until she was 5 weeks old. And on the day of her baptism, she actually had the first of grand mal seizure. And she had multiple grand mal seizures every day for the remainder of her life.
Courtney's parents, Mary and Jerry Lindbergh, went straight to the emergency room as doctors considered possible causes, from a brain tumor to meningitis. The tests continued, and at 7 months old, the doctors thought Courtney might have what's called West syndrome. But their next move did more harm than healing.
When she was 7 months old, we gave her this medication, and what we didn't know is Courtney's allergic to steroids. And so within 36 hours, it's a steroid.
She looked like the Michelin Man.
Yeah, she blew up, her brain went septic, her brain swelled, she lost her sight, she lost all development that she had at that point, which was She was
9
7
months.
months old, so she was actually ahead of the game, even with the medication she was taking. So she was 7 to 9 months in development. And at that point, she never, ever superseded that.
The search continued as Courtney's parents and older brother desperately sought to heal her.
We spent the first 7 years of her life really seeking answers, trying to fix her. That's what we kind of call it. We were trying to fix her. And we sought medical opinions from all over the United States and England, Scotland.
Had all the tests done.
Every test available at that time.
After 7 years losing faith in medical interventions, the Catholic family looked for a miracle and traveled to the Lourdes Grotto in France. Because of neurological issues, Courtney had little control of her hands, and they were typically clenched in a fist. So it shocked her mother when Courtney suddenly grabbed a statue of Our Lady as she was being lowered into the cold Lourdes water.
As I'm looking at Courtney, she took Our Lady, put her over her heart, and with her fisted hand, placed the other hand there and did not move from that position. That's the only time in her life that ever happened.
Then, when it was Mary's turn to go into the miraculous spring waters, the prayer she had been practicing suddenly escaped her.
They were asking me, what is the problem? The women were, what could they pray for as they dunked me in the water? And I stood there and I heard a young woman's voice, and I thought it was one of the women. And the only word I heard her say was acceptance. And so I opened my eyes and I looked around, and they asked me again, and I was really confused, and I said acceptance.
Meanwhile, Jerry Lindbergh had a similar experience.
So I went in the water at the same time, but she didn't know till we talked about it.
I didn't know that, yeah.
I said the exact same word, and I'm like, acceptance, what does acceptance mean? I don't even know what that means. What does that mean?
It took the Catholic couple 4 years to unpack what had happened. When waiting in yet another hospital room, Mary reflected on what she heard at a women's retreat about healing.
The third point was acceptance, that healing would not happen this side of heaven, and it would only happen when you entered into the gates of heaven, into our Lord's arms. So here we were in a hospital watching this number on a board, seeing where she was in the neurosurgery process, and it just sort of landed on me. Acceptance. And I looked at him and I kind of knocked his coffee out of his hand. And I said, this is it. This is what it is. And he said, I don't understand. I said, we heard a young woman's voice. Who went in the water first? And he just looked at me. Yeah, kind of like that. And he said, Courtney went in the water first. I said, yeah.
Mary and Jerry Lindbergh believe it was Courtney's voice they heard in Lourdes, and their suffering servant of a daughter was sending a message.
Everything changed. We brought her home, and we lived boldly from that point on, because we didn't know how much time we had. And so we took her everywhere. There was no place that she was not welcome, whether people wanted her there or not.
The Catholic couple stopped trying to fix their daughter and finally accepted the life she had.
You can use your hands, silly girl.
The dignity of her personhood became paramount to us because she had a job to do,
She had to evangelize.
She had to evangelize.
The Lindberghs started to evangelize too, as Mary put pen to paper and shared Courtney's life on her blog, social media, and even in a forthcoming book.
Are you having a good evening?
Courtney's witness, her parents say, sends a countercultural message on love.
She taught us how to love without condition. There was nothing she could do to earn our love. She wasn't going to be a prima ballerina. She wasn't going to be a scholar athlete. She wasn't going to get married and have children. We knew that. She just was Courtney.
It was a love-filled life. And then, around Courtney's 22nd birthday, doctors told the family her time was coming to an end in this world. Her body was not processing food, and she was slowly starving to death.
I said, all right, Lord, I trust in you. If this is it, it's been 22 years of a gift.
As the Lindberghs brought their daughter home from the hospital for the last time, they decided the days before Courtney's death would be filled with life.
So we brought her home, and we began 3 months, the most beautiful, intense 3 months of our life with her. We opened our doors. Anyone that wanted to see her could come see her. There were strangers that I had met through the internet that showed up on my front lawn. May we come in and spend time with her?
People continue to pour in with prayers, drawn to Courtney's model of holiness, right until the very end.
On December 27, 2014, at 1:51 a.m. on the feast of St. John the Beloved, she took her last breath. She simply exhaled in my arms with a smile on her face. Then the hard part came, because when you spent 22 years every day for 22 years, 24 hours a day, physically caring for someone, and then they're simply gone, there's a huge void that's left.
And nearly 4 years later, though they miss their daughter every day, the Lindberghs know that Courtney's mission is now theirs.
That is her legacy of love, is God does not make mistakes. She had every ability she needed to do the job he needed her to do. If she had everything she needed, and she has what the world thinks is so much less than what you or I might have, then what is our excuse?
That does it for this edition of EWTN Pro-Life Weekly. Until next time, be sure to reach us at prolifeweekly@ewtn.com or connect with us on social media. Just search for EWTN Pro-Life on all the major platforms. And remember, life is a gift. Your life is a gift. God bless.